What's going on, everybody? It's Andrew here for Bowery Mick History. This is something that I usually do in the morning, but it turns out that's not happening today, at least this week. It might become a recurring words. I can't words right now. It might become a recurring thing doing this at night. I feel like more people have more time at night to watch me talk about history things on Twitch. But anyway, another benefit of it being at night is I can do this, and no one will think I have a problem. When you take a sip of beer in the morning, people think you have a problem because you might actually have a problem. But no one says anything when you do it after 5 o'clock. Anyway, so yeah, this is the Bowery Mick History Morning Show, titled Not Morning Show, because it is, 8:30 at night. I had some important things that had to happen today, so that's why it got moved all the way to tonight, and I'm going to try to fit in the fact that it's at night at least 3 more times before I kill the stream. Anyway, I didn't have a ton planned for this episode because really I have just one big thing. But before we get to that one big thing, and if you follow the Bowery Mick History Instagram, you probably know what that one big thing is. If you don't, why don't you? You should. Please. It makes me feel better inside. Anyway, before we get to that one big thing, there is one other thing that I did want to mention, and that is podcast is back. The extended, unintentional mid-season break that it had been on for a month, maybe 2 months, finally ended this past Sunday. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat so y'all can see it, check it out. I'm also going to put that in the description of the videos when I post them on Facebook and YouTube, which, by the way, if you miss the show live, I do post the recording usually within hours, sometimes even minutes of it going live on YouTube and on Facebook, so you can always check back and look at past videos and all that. Alright, so wow, the tech side of things is actually going pretty good so far tonight. It has been a couple of months since I started streaming regularly, so I do keep a close eye on that sort of thing, if nothing else to make me feel like I'm smart. Anyway, so the big thing that I wanted to talk about tonight is the Battle of Mogadishu, which, if you follow a lot of like military history, anything on social media, whether it be like, accounts on Instagram, Facebook, whatever the fuck, odds are the past couple days you've seen countless references to Black Hawk Down, countless pictures of the Battle of Mogadishu, or supposedly from the Battle of Mogadishu, mentions of the 2 Delta operators, Shugart and Gordon. I think that was his last name. Shit, I should have looked that up. Yes, Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon. Years later, and I still remember. This is actually something that I have been kind of low-key fascinated with for many years, the Battle of Mogadishu. I'm just going to put the picture up, talk about that in a second. But, this is something that I've always been kind of fascinated with, I actually, when I was a freshman in high school, to celebrate the end of my very first week of high school, my freshman year, because I went to high school over by Union Square in Manhattan. Right by there is the famous Strand bookstore, one of the largest used bookstores ever. One of the largest. And, I thought, to celebrate, me making it through my first week of high school, I'm going to go and buy myself a new book. Mind you, this is before I decided I wanted to become a historian, and I was already doing historian-y things, like buying books to celebrate things. Anyway, the book I bought was Mark Bowden's Black Hawk Down, which also inspired the film Black Hawk Down. And if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it, even today. It is fairly old, but it still is a very good and well-rounded account of not only the Battle of Mogadishu, but the goings-ons in Somalia in 1992 and 1993 sort of lend some immediate context to the battle. But what I wanted to do is talk about something that I always enjoy talking about is the causes, conduct, and consequences of historical events. And when we look at something like the Battle of Mogadishu, we also have to look at why were American troops in Somalia in 1993. And to really answer that question, you have to go all the way back to the late 19th century, when Europe was carving up Africa for its own personal gain. Somalia, like much of Africa during that period, was colonized by imperialist European powers, and over the course of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it changed hands from different European powers. At one point, Italy was in charge of it. I think after World War II, it came under the control of Great Britain, sort of. It's a little fuzzy. But then, during the, post-World War II era, going into the Cold War, we see a number of independence movements popping up all across Africa. Some violent, some not so violent. And by the end of the 1960s, roughly, you do have a large number of independent nations in Africa that have, now claimed their independence from these European imperialist powers. And the newly formed state of Somalia, it does have ambition. It did have ambition. It wanted to be, a member of the global community. It wanted to be a player on the global stage. And so it starts trying to, find a place for itself in the Cold War, essentially, trying to make alliances with different nations, but on either side. But I think it was kind of trying to court Soviet friendship, or at least friendly relations with the Soviet Union. But this kind of goes nowhere, and without having that foreign influence anymore, that foreign support, it does, the early state of Somalia does struggle to maintain any kind of stable government, because its borders were written by white people, were drawn by white people who didn't understand the cultural dynamics of the region. And so you end up having a lot of infighting, a lot of tribalism. I hate using that word, but I can't think of a better word at this moment. If anyone in the chat or in the comments knows a better word, please let me know. I would love to use that. I hate using that word. Anyway, so you end up with the country eventually falling apart into a civil war. And this civil war ends up causing a famine by the start of the 1990s. And that's where the United Nations gets involved. In 1991, the United Nations decides it's going to conduct a humanitarian aid mission in Somalia to address the famine that is killing literal tens of thousands. I forget how many actually die as a result of this famine, but I think it is somewhere in the high 100,000s, almost a million, probably higher. I really should have looked that number up. Anyway, in the process, mind you, while the United Nations is trying to address the famine and try to bring food to the people, starving people in Somalia, the civil war is still going on. You have a number of factions fighting for domination of the country, and this is putting an enormous amount of stress on the humanitarian aid mission, and it's hampering those efforts. And so the UN and the United States basically try to organize a sort of ceasefire while they distribute food throughout the country. And some of the different factions were willing to negotiate for this ceasefire. Others were not, and among those was a fellow by the name of Mohammed Farah Aidid. And Aidid controlled a large portion of the country, including the former capital of Mogadishu. And it became very clear by the beginning of 1992, well, actually about midway through 92, that Aidid was not willing to work with the UN. He was not willing to call a ceasefire. He was willing only to continue fighting. And so in response to this, it's actually one of the last acts of George H.W. Bush's administration was the deployment of a special task force called Task Force Ranger, which consisted of the 3rd Ranger Battalion of the 75th Ranger Regiment and a unit of Delta Force operators who are like the top tier U.S. Army Special Forces guys. They are so covert that on official documents they don't exist, and that's not me trying to make them sound cool. Like literally, anything that pertains to their operations gets covered in black ink before it goes into a file cabinet. Back when they had file cabinets. Anyway, and the goal of Task Force Ranger is essentially to dismantle Mohammed Farah Aidid's entire organization and remove him from power eventually, or at least that was the intention. And they did this by essentially going after his organization, like the higher ups in his organization, and various raids throughout the city of Mogadishu in 1993. And this culminates in a raid that was supposed to take place on October 3rd, 1993, around a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Essentially, the idea was to pick up or capture 2 advisors of Aidid. I have their names. And I'm trying my best to pronounce these as accurately as possible. I am not the best educated person in how these names are supposed to be pronounced, but I am doing my best to do them justice. So the 2 people that Task Force Ranger was going in to capture was Omar Salad Elmin. I think I pronounced that right. I hope I did. And Mohammed Hassan Awale. And these 2, Elim was one of Aidid's top political advisors, and Awale was, Elmin was Aidid's foreign minister, because Aidid had essentially declared himself, the ruler of Somalia, so he had to have a government, had to have a foreign minister. And Awale was one of his top political advisors. And they were, U.S. intelligence efforts had placed them in hotel called the Olympic Hotel in Mogadishu, in the area known as the Bakara Market area. And the plan was basically Rangers would set up a perimeter around the building. Delta Force would go in, grab whoever they needed to grab. Everyone would get up on a Humvee and drive out of the city. Pretty simple plan. They had done it before, but most of the times when they had done it previously, it was done at night, which was a very important factor. This one was being done in the middle of the day. And so what ends up happening is, starts off pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Everyone's doing exactly what they need to do. Rangers who are setting up the perimeter, they're coming in by Black Hawk helicopters, roping down onto the ground to set up blocking positions at the four corners, four road intersections that surround the building. And Delta goes in, do their thing. Humvee convoy comes in. Pretty straightforward, except one of the Ranger units, called Chalks, has a casualty right out the gate. Ranger by the name of Todd Blackburn, as he's trying to fast rope out of the helicopter, missed the rope and fell out of a Black Hawk helicopter. That is not a fall that you walk away from. And so Blackburn needs immediate medical attention. He needs to be evacuated as quickly as possible. And suddenly that slows everything down. And the momentum that Task Force Ranger had in this particular raid suddenly goes out the window. And in the process, one of the Black Hawk helicopters, whose call sign was Super 61, gets shot down as they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with Blackburn, how they're going to get him out. Super 61 takes a hit, goes down, and now the objective is no longer getting these two high-value individuals out of the city. Now it is to get to that crash site, secure it, figure out what's going on, and get any survivors and hopefully the bodies of the crew out as quickly as possible. This goes from being a simple, hour-long raid to being a battle that lasts most of the better part of 24 hours. Not exactly 24 hours. They get out. I think the last U.S. troops managed to exit the city sometime in the afternoon, or late morning, early afternoon of October 4th. But in that time period, you have 19 American soldiers being killed in action and several dozen more being wounded. And it is the longest sustained engagement the United States Army had been in since Vietnam. And in the process of trying to secure the crash site for Super 61, another Black Hawk gets shot down. Call sign was Super 64, and they actually had survivors. And while everyone was focused on Super 61 and getting to that crash site and securing that crash site, no one was really going to Super 64. And while there were clear survivors at 6-4. And so in that process, two Delta Force snipers, Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon, volunteered to go down onto the ground and try to secure that second crash site while everyone else was focused on Super 61's crash site. The end result, though, was Shugart and Gordon both died protecting that crash site, and one of its survivors, pilot Mike Durant, who was captured by Aidid's militia and was held captive for several weeks. The Battle of Mogadishu becomes, this famous. I don't want to call it a debacle, but it's also not a victory. It's one of those instances where the objectives were accomplished eventually, but it didn't feel like a win. Which, when you think about it, comes to characterize a lot of the United States military's operations throughout the world, really, since the Vietnam War. Yeah, the mission was accomplished, but didn't really feel like much of a win. And something about it, maybe it was Mark Bowden's book, or maybe it was something else, but to this day, we still think about the events of the Battle of Mogadishu. It still has an interesting place in popular American culture. Most notably, the famous film Black Hawk Down, which I think came out in 2003-ish, which, when you think about it, is actually kind of interesting because pretty much everyone who survived the Battle of Mogadishu, at least on the American side, was still alive when they made the movie. It's a little weird. And then, for even more recently, the wreckage of Super 6-1, whatever was left, was recently recovered. It is actually currently on display in the United States Army Special Forces Museum, which I believe is in North Carolina, which is a pretty interesting museum. I wish I could go see it in person, maybe one day. But, it's on display. And, I've met countless people who are either in the Army, were in the Army, or wish they were in the Army, who, in one way or another, make some sort of reference to either the movie Black Hawk Down or the actual battle, either as like their, some sort of internet username or something like that, or they'll just like quote the movie. The movie is very quotable, especially Eric Bana's character, who at one point says, "This here's my safety," when being, because he plays a Delta operator who's walking around a base with a loaded weapon, and a Ranger captain tells him, "Hey, you should put the safety on that. That's you're breaking all of the regs that are there for a good reason." And he's like, "This here's my safety," because Delta Force apparently has some animosity with Rangers. But yeah, this is also still a big thing for current active duty Rangers and Delta Force operators to this day. They even give talks on this at West Point, which actually there is a really interesting video, which I'm gonna see if I can find, because it's this whole lecture at West Point. Actually, it's not really a lecture. It's more of a panel discussion with several guys who were there. I think one of them was actually one of the Delta Force operators who was on the ground. This point. It's a long video, but it's definitely worth the watch. I highly encourage anyone who's interested in this sort of stuff to check that out. But yeah, this event has actually even been translated into video games. There was a video game series years ago. I think it's completely vanished off the face of the earth. I think it was called like Delta Force. Like it was really like mid-level military-esque first-person shooter. I think it was like a PC only kind of deal. It had a couple of entries in its franchise, and one of them was based all around Black Hawk Down, the Battle of Mogadishu. I'm fairly certain the Battle of Mogadishu was like a scenario that you can go through in one of the Arma games, I want to say. Maybe Arma 3. I might be wrong, though. And that's really it, though. And yet it still has this, big grip on American imagination, modern American imagination and memory. Everyone is at least familiar with the phrase Black Hawk Down. It is a generally ambiguous phrase that could be used in any kind of situation involving a Black Hawk helicopter, but there is a great deal of meaning behind it to a lot of people. That meaning is directly connected to the Battle of Mogadishu. So yeah, that's all I got for talking about Somalia and Mogadishu and the Battle of Mogadishu. I don't want to end things this stream on a sad or remotely anything remotely negative. I always want to end on a positive note. That's why I included Sausage Palu last week. And so, as I have in the past 2 times I've done this, I always like to end with a neat thing that I find in some sort of neat historical photo or artifact or whatever. And this is going to be completely unrelated to everything that I have said for the past 30 or so minutes ish. That's this. Today has no real significance regarding prohibition or anything like that. But in 1933, prohibition was lifted. It was one of the many great things that happened under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. And this was a commemorative glass, which I have a replica of right here. Lovely. Because prohibition was one of the dumbest things we as a country ever did. Ever. And repealing it was such a great idea that, as you can see in the glass, both parties were behind this. Because it was a really bad idea to ban alcohol to begin with. I also got a new beer for the first time. I'm trying for the first time a new beer. Which is exciting. Oh shit. That's a high number next to that percent sign. But it's lovely. It's a very nice pumpkin ale, and I highly recommend. You know what? They're not paying me. I'm not gonna give this one beer from Missouri. Well, anyway, I'm not going to give them free publicity. If they want that, they can pay me. Anyway, so yeah, that's a neat little glass. And you can find replicas of it, or even originals. You could probably find an original, although that would probably be expensive as all holy hell. I got this at the gift shop at the home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt up in Hyde Park. So it's a lot cheaper than an original, but it still does the trick. Wow, that is actually very good. Anyway, so on that note, thank you all for watching. Whether it was live or it was the recording, thank you all. And if you have something that you think would be cool for this last segment, like a cool photo that you have or some kind of artifact, whatever, you can always send an email to BoweryMickHistory@gmail.com. I encourage any and all community engagement. It makes me feel like I'm actually doing something, and who knows, it might actually make a difference in the long run in the history field. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and have a good one. whatever time it is whenever you're watching.